Hello and good evening, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Karoline Myers, and I'm the Education Manager here at Des Moines Performing Arts, and we are just thrilled to have you here with us for the first of our Creative Conversations. This is a new series that we're launching where we are inviting you to join us for conversations with some of our favorite artists and creative individuals whose work has appeared on our stages and has impacted audiences and the community here in Central Iowa. So this is the first, and we are delighted that our first guest is the wonderful Ashli St. Armant, better known to many as Jazzy Ash of Jazzy Ash and the Leaping Lizards. Ashli, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is so special. I feel special being the first.
Well, as we were thinking about creative individuals, and you wear so many different hats as an artist, we just feel like there's a whole lot that we can talk about. So for our viewers, I have lots of things to kind of tee up to kick off our conversation, but we also want to hear from you. So if you're joining us and watching on YouTube, feel free to pop any questions you have as we have this conversation into the chat box, and we'll take some of those questions as our conversation rolls along. So just to get us started, Ashli, tell us a little bit about your work with Jazzy Ash and the Leaping Lizards for those who maybe aren't familiar with your work, and kind of where you fit in the landscape of children's music in the country.
Well, I think we've been Jazzy Ash and the Leaping Lizards for about 6 years now, and we call ourselves the first and only New Orleans jazz band just for kids and families. It's a long byline, but we make music for families and kids and student audiences, and we've been touring the country for several years now, and my bandmates are like my family. And so what we do is we sing music that's either original or traditional music that's nostalgic of the New Orleans traditional style. And we also go around the country to student audiences at large performing arts centers like yours, and teach students about the history of jazz and African American folk music in America. And it's been an amazing journey to build what we've been building.
Yeah, the band is wonderful. The music is great. So you can really tell your musician chops, but I think it was really clear. I think the first time I had the opportunity to experience your band was at a conference called International Performing Arts for Youth. And I think it was probably 2017 that you showcased.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much immediately, just a few songs in, I was like, this is going to be a great fit for what we're looking for to bring to our young audiences. And especially, many of our community members know we have our family series, which of course is for family audiences having those intergenerational experiences. And then we have our school matinee series. And oftentimes we try to find artists that we feel like will be great fits for both. But sometimes that can be challenging of what do schools want, but also still has that really fun atmosphere that families kicking back on a weekend will also really enjoy. So it was really clear that you were a great fit for both of those, which I think speaks really highly to just how well you think about creating work for young audiences. So Ashli, how is it different performing for an adult audience versus a young audience? And what are some of the things you kind of think about when you're creating for young people in particular?
I very rarely perform for adult audiences. And in fact, I've only done it a handful of times. I've been doing work with children in music since 2008. And so my focus really has been for children. However, when we do family shows, we really call that a family show. In other words, it's not just for kids, but kids and their families, and even adults who show up to our shows without children. It's important to us to make sure that they have a great experience too. So no matter if it's an educational show or it's a show that's for families, we make sure that the two things happen. Number one, they're learning something, whether it's something about music history or something like that, and that they're having a great time. So even at our student shows, and sometimes like our junior high audiences or upper elementary kids are like, I'm not sure about this jazz stuff. We make sure that throughout the entire experience, they realize that, okay, this can be fun. And actually, wow, jazz is exciting. And this is something that I really want to dive into, maybe even in the future. And I love when that happens. That's like my favorite part, no matter what kind of show it is. So to answer your question, I think that for children, it's not that much different. It just means that we have to do something that's developmentally appropriate for them. In other words, what can they grasp? So I usually take concepts that I would share with anybody and just make sure that I'm saying them in a way that a 4-year-old or a 7th grader can understand.
Yeah, and I think it's very clear that, the music is great and the kids are having a great time, but I like to think of them as like it's that connective tissue and that kind of interstitial moments of how you introduce the song and then you share a little bit of the history in that really developmentally appropriate way and in a way that they can really relate to. You just do really beautifully, and that's an art in and of itself.
So I appreciate that, and I think the key is like it's not about dumbing it down. It's not like to make songs like, oh, is this a song that only kids would like, or I'm trying to cater specifically to kids, but that like they're people, like kids are people too, right? And so you just, no matter who you're speaking to, you always want to know your audience. And sometimes that audience is children, and sometimes it's people who have never seen anybody who looks like me, whether they're adults or kids. So I'm always thinking about that sort of thing when I'm creating content.
Yeah, that representation is so important, as well as new perspectives and empathy. And I think it's just really, really clear. So I want to maybe back up just a little bit and talk about, so we met you in 2017, and we're really excited about the opportunity to bring you to Des Moines. And we finally got you here in April of 2019, which may seem like a long time, but is actually pretty quick in the booking cycle as we're scoping things out and running and getting dates on the calendar. And we had just a wonderful 2 or 3 days with you here in Des Moines of April of 2019. So let's talk a little bit about your school shows. What do you remember about the school show audiences that you had with us that day?
I will say a couple of things. Number one, it's the most students we've ever seen in one day. So I think we saw 3,000 kids at that theater, and it was just so remarkable. And we all talked about this for hours afterwards back at the hotel, that 3,000 kids, and they were all so well behaved. We're like, how did they do it? And they had a great time, but they also learned something, and they were responsive and interactive and respectful. And it was just such a lovely, lovely experience. And that was a treat. It was such a treat to be with those kiddos. And we really felt their energy and played off their energy as we performed. It was great.
Yeah, one of the things I really love about your music is it's so interactive. So you're constantly inviting the kids to get up and move. You're teaching them different hand clapping rhythms that have such a cultural tradition in the lead up to jazz. So they're so invited to be a part of all of those performance moments, in addition to those pieces of learning and that history and that cultural context that you're giving them in between.
Thank you. We've learned some things along the way. Like I said, for example, we do traditional New Orleans music. So we used to throw out beads in the audience during a specific song. And we learned very quickly that if not every child gets a set of beads, they're going to be upset. So we had kids like crying and yelling like, I didn't get him, or he broke my beads, that sort of thing. So now we figured out that we can still do that same song, and I mime that I'm throwing out beads, and then 10 kids in one section can pretend to catch them and feel satisfied, just as satisfied as if they had catch an actual set of beads. So those are the kind of tricks that we learned along the way, and to get kids riled up, but also encourage them to stay, generally in their seats, and to sit down sometimes and learn something, and other times are appropriate to get up and dance with your friends. So it's something that we've massaged very carefully along the way.
Yeah, and I think an artist, they know their audience, and they figure out kind of what's that arc of that experience they want to take an audience through, whether it's emotionally and the height of different emotions. And I think it's a special skill set to be thinking about that with young audiences, especially when you have so many, and really guiding them through that experience. So where can they let out those wiggles and that energy so that then they're ready to be open and receptive to that information that you're providing?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it for me is that like I want kids to feel like they can do that in my show. It's not appropriate for every show, but jazz is like, I want them to feel all the elements of jazz. And jazz is about dancing and feeling, being connected with your body. And I think through that experience, you start to understand where this music came from. And they can't understand the historical value of jazz without understanding the musical significance of it and how music can be therapeutic. And it can help you get through difficult times, but it also can make you laugh and dance. And I think all those dynamic parts are what makes jazz and music history so interesting.
Well, and Ashli, why jazz? And there's like some really deep family connections that you talk about in your school show or your show for families, which I think really makes it personal in a way that's really meaningful to young people.
Mm-hmm. So for me, my family, I was raised in California, but my family goes back as many generations as we can trace in New Orleans. My mother is the first person in my family that came to California, so I'm the first generation Californian, I say. And even with some recent information that I found out, my family goes back to New Orleans at least until the 1780s. So
wow.
many generations of my family go all the way back in New Orleans, and jazz obviously is from New Orleans as well. It was birthed there, and so every time I do a show and I learn more about jazz history, specifically the jazz that was made in New Orleans during this historic time of jazz being birthed, I feel like I'm learning more about myself. And in the show, I talk about my mother, who integrated an all-white school in 3rd grade. I talk about my grandfather, who was very instrumental and involved in the civil rights movement. And to think that like these things were happening right alongside the development of some very significant music that's important to all of our history as Americans, not just Black folks. And so I think it's so important to share this, because I think oftentimes students, when they learn about Black history, you learn about, Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and slavery. And that's the extent of it. And thankfully, some programs are starting to develop even more. But we hear so much about the struggle of Black folks, and that's definitely part of the story. But no matter what my work is, and I work on different projects in my life, I always want people to understand that the Black experience over the time in history is a dynamic experience. It's not just about the struggle. We also have laughed and made music and loved and played, even through the most difficult things a person can endure, like slavery. Even through slavery times, people loved and laughed and made songs about those sorts of things. And so that's the significance of jazz for me and all Black American music, to reflect on the heart of the music and how it can be a coping mechanism for so many throughout generations.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think you take such care and responsibility with how you steward that music, and really kind of introduce it to a new generation, and giving them that context as you introduce them to, yes, it's jump in your seats and find that joy and feel that deep in your heart, but to have that respect and that understanding that it has that deeper connection to our history as a people.
And if they leave, I feel like if they leave with that jump and jive feeling and that's all, I'm okay with that too, because that's how I started with jazz. I feel like that's a seed, right? And even when I started Jazzy Ash and the Leaping Lizards, I wasn't expecting to get this deep. I thought like, oh, I'll do jazz. I don't know if anybody else is doing jazz for kids. And I still have shows like that where we're just like bouncing around and having a good time, especially with our family audiences. But then when you dig a little deeper, you get to see like, oh, there's meaning behind this jumping around. Like it's actually like an active protest in a way, So I count it all a win if people enjoy themselves.
Yeah, well, and how much more open we can be through the arts when we do find that enjoyment and that connection.
Absolutely.
Those big ideas. Mm-hmm. So we started off your visit with 3,000. I think we had like mostly kindergarten through 4th graders was kind of who we targeted for our school shows, and that was a great day. And then you also joined us on our family series.
Yeah,
which was a really great day.
I love working with family audiences because you mentioned it, and it was exactly the right word: multi-generational experiences. And that's, I think, also the beauty of Black American music, because we have, like, when we talk about playground songs and things like that, I always see this amazing spark that happens in folks' eyes when I mention a song that they've sung on a playground, and they didn't realize until that moment that their child or grandchild also knew that song. And they're like, oh, Miss Mary Mack, whatever. And they do the hand clapping, and it's like, wow, I didn't know that we were so connected. Like you said, connective tissue, and that's exactly what music can do, right? Is inspire folks to be more connected with the folks in their lives. And it's also, the family shows are an opportunity for us to get this play, and my bandmates are my family members. I'm actually an only child, but I really believe that God gave me these brothers. And I hear this feedback a lot. You can feel it. You can feel that we're connected in this way. And so we just get to get down with the kids and dance and have a good time. And we love that part of our jobs too.
Yeah, it's inviting that playfulness, that you see that camaraderie on stage, and I think it just sets the entire audience at ease that, hey, we're here to have a good time, and we can have that with one another, between parents, grandparents, and young people.
Especially with jazz, I think sometimes people, and this is part of my job to debunk the idea that jazz is serious, or elevator music. People hear jazz, they're like, oh, this isn't going to be that great, and then they leave, out of breath because they bounced around so much. They're like, oh wait, I forgot that jazz could be fun, I hope that, especially for children who maybe have never had any interest in jazz whatsoever, before my show, and they leave with a passion and an idea for it.
Yeah, well, so much joy coming out of that theater as we watched everybody leave that day. So that was kind of the scope of the performances you did with us, and what I hope is the first of many getting you back here. But we're always interested when we bring artists to Des Moines in finding other ways to uniquely connect and impact the community with the unique skills and interests they have through the arts. And sometimes, we kind of have some kind of, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but things that are easier that we kind of see happen more often that we can slide people into. But we always like to go to artists and say, well, what do you really love? Or what's something that you do that's maybe unique and special? And we were able to work with you on a workshop that is maybe one of my all-time favorite workshops or community experiences that were able to do. So your agent had mentioned in passing that you had just done a workshop for children's librarians. And so I had to dig in a little bit more about that. And this really comes out of your work as an educator and an accomplished ukulele player. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of this workshop that you've been doing for children's librarians in different communities.
Yeah, so, when I saw you, it was recently developing in that particular way. So I've done workshops. Obviously, I play ukulele on stage, and I teach ukulele locally to high school and junior high school students, and even elementary. But it had been a rare occasion for me to teach it to adults. And then when I started doing it, I realized that educators and the librarians really can benefit from having this instrument as a tool, as literally an instrument, for storytelling, for learning. And so developing this workshop was really fun. Oh gosh, these librarians were so into it, and they were so fun to work with. And they were so willing to learn and to share their ideas back with me. And so what we did is I shared some real basic ukulele understanding and basic skills, which, by the way, I love about ukuleles because they're so approachable. I started with guitar in my field, and I thought that was so difficult. When I discovered ukulele, I thought, wow, this is actually way easier. 4 strings, 4 fingers, I always say. And so these educators and librarians caught on to it so fast. And then once we developed a little bit of skill, then I taught them how to use the few chords and strumming patterns that they learned to incorporate into their storytelling with young audiences in their libraries. And man, we had a great time. It was so fun. And I can't wait to be back on the road and do something like that again.
Yeah, it was really serendipitous in a lot of ways. So we rolled it out to our local librarians first just to gauge if there'd be interest. And then they said, hey, did you know that I think it's a conference they hold every 2 years of children's librarians from all across the state of Iowa is being held in Ames, which is, about a 45-minute drive north of us, the day after we had slated for this workshop. So we ended up having about 30 librarians from all over the state, where some of them are from rural communities 2 to 3 hours away, who just happened to be coming into central Iowa for that conference and tagged that.
I don't think I knew that at the time.
Yeah, and they kicked off their conference weekend that way. So I just thought it was a wonderful testament to, we're so interested in how do we get arts into the lives of young people wherever they are, and hopefully that's coming through our doors and coming to the theater. But we know libraries are such a community resource for experiences for young people. So to arm those librarians to bring some music into their storytelling on a regular basis, I just think it's such a great way to spread that ripple effect out further as we think about young people.
I think for me, it feels like an extension of what I already do even on stage, right? That my ethos is that this is for all of us. The music, jazz is for everyone. Jazz is for kids, for older people. It's for people of all backgrounds and races. And ukulele is for everybody too. And, like I said, when I learned to play it, I thought, wow, this is so easy. And so many people could benefit from knowing how to play this simple instrument that can make their experiences with their audiences, large or small, so much more dynamic,
Absolutely. And their joy that night, they just left the theater or the lobby where we held the workshop just buzzing, and they were ready to go back and incorporate some songs just to mix up their stories with. And I loved that one of the tricks or the things that we worked on was kind of these different chord sets that could be sneaky chords or happy chords. So just narrating a well-known story either from a book or a folktale or a fairy tale, and just kind of underscoring that accompaniment was just really delightful all the way around, and something that they could take back to story hour in their libraries the next day with maybe a little bit of ongoing practice.
I'd love to see how some of them were incorporating it now, you know?
Yeah, great. It'd be great to check back in with them. So Ashli, you know, that was 2019, April of 2019. The world has changed a lot in that year and a half since you've been here. So I'm curious.
Has it?
Has it? How are you navigating these times as an artist that has been used to, you know, traveling to performing arts centers and venues across the country with your band? How has that shift been, and how are you staying creative during this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging. It's challenging in a lot of ways. And at first, I'll be honest, I wanted to crawl in a hole, and I thought, oh gosh, it's all over. And the truth is, it's not over. It's just different. And that's part of an artist, is being creative. And so it's been, the challenge has been how to be creative in a different way. And I'm not touring with my band, and I miss my bandmates so dearly. I've had a chance to work with them at a safety distance a couple of times, literally 2 or 3 times since the pandemic started. But we're used to going on the road with each other a couple times a month. So it's been a challenge for me to figure out different streams of income, different ways to be creative. And yet, even though it has been so difficult, I feel like this has been my most creative time in my career because I continue to make music, and I've been working on some significant projects. I don't know if I should mention them now.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. So
yeah,
I'm start with what you just released last week.
Yeah, I had an EP that was released last Friday on the 13th called Goodfoot, a 6-song EP. And I was so excited to release it. And it was good to put my mind towards some good energy. These songs are about dancing your socks off, about spending time with your family, about getting outside and breathing some fresh air. And so, you know, when I was having a difficult moment, I would grab my pen and paper and sit down at my piano or grab my ukulele and just write. And some of my best work, I think, has come out on this EP. So that was last Friday that came out. And 2 of the songs on the album are collaborations. One was with my wonderful friend Amelia Robinson, who's also a family music performer. And we literally wrote that song, I think, in 2019 on a random stoop in Broadway, like in Brooklyn. How New York is that, right? So cool. We just decided, like, hey, let's grab a bagel and write a song, and it ended up on the record. And there's another tune that I wrote with my partner that's on the record as well. So it's just a really intimate, lovely project. I'm also working on a book series through Audible. So it's all audiobook, and the first book came out in 2019 in November, and I'm currently writing the second book, and it'll be a series from here on out. So it's been lovely to use my energy to create long form work, and because it's an audio series, there's also an opportunity to create music for those projects as well. So for our second book, we're creating the entire score ourselves. So you'll hear the Leaping Lizards on the scoring for this second book. And what you see right now is our first book, Viva Durant and the Secret of the Silver Buttons. And so it'll be Viva Durant, and I can't tell you what, but it'll be her next mystery. And it'll be great. I'm so excited to write about this young girl who just, again, spends her time solving mysteries around New Orleans. It seems like all my work centers around New Orleans, but why not? It's such a vibrant city. And it's sort of a reimagining of my childhood in some ways, since I spent my summers and holidays there many a year. And I'm writing musicals, because why not?
Oh, it's very clear that city has such a place in your heart, and it has such deep family connections that it makes sense that it makes these appearances throughout your work.
I think so. I try to fight it sometimes. Yeah, I try to fight it sometimes, but there's really no point, because it's a wellspring of inspiration. I never get enough of being inspired by that city. And I was mentioning that I also am in the works of developing a musical, and it's called North, and it is a story about a young man, a teenage boy, and his mom who are escaping through the Underground Railroad. They're escaping slavery. So that's a heavier project, but again, it is for young audiences, and they do start their journey near New Orleans. They actually start their journey in a city called Vacherie, and that city is about an hour away from New Orleans in modern times driving distance. And Vacherie is where my family's from. That's where they were enslaved. And I recently did a visit. Actually, so I was actually in New Orleans gathering audio sounds from the city for the audiobook project. And I had an opportunity to go to a plantation tour in Vacherie. And I thought, oh, wow, there's a plantation in the city where my family was enslaved. And I went to this plantation tour at a place called Oak Alley. And as it turned out, this plantation was situated exactly next door to where my family was enslaved. So it was an incredible experience to go there. And when I saw that place and I felt that place, I thought, oh my gosh, the musical has to start here. And so they go from Vacherie then into New Orleans, which is their first stop on the Underground Railroad, and on from there. And it's been a really interesting, deep thing to create this project. And I felt so inspired by my ancestors. It feels like it's breathed by them. And I hope I do them honor by presenting this when I have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, such a deeply personal and meaningful story. And I'm curious, as you know, you've been uncovering these family connections and doing your research, how you're thinking about, because it is a heavy topic, how you make that, I don't want to say the word palatable, but how you introduce young audiences to join you on that journey in a way that feels really developmentally appropriate for them.
I think I've been doing this work for a while. You know, even in the shows that we brought to Des Moines last year, it's about jazz history, but jazz didn't start there. It has this history that starts all the way back to West Africa. So on stage, we already talk about slavery and segregation and the civil rights movement and things like that. So we've had the opportunity to tackle these difficult conversations with these audiences, these young audiences before. And I consider it an honor and a significant opportunity to share with young audiences. And I never want them to go away confused or frustrated. So I work very carefully, and I choose my words very carefully with audiences when I talk about these kind of things to honor the folks that these things happen to, you know. And so in developing this musical, it's no different. The only difference is that these characters are not real people, although some of them are based on real people. And there are a few characters in the book that actually are real people. Can I tell you about one of them?
Please do.
I'd like to know. Okay, so there's a character in the story called Tam the Brave, and he lives in a Maroon community. So the Maroons were people who escaped slavery, but instead of traveling north to a non-slave state or to Canada, they would move into the swamps or the bayous. And the significance of that was because they knew the land already. So it was like sometimes a safer choice, and nobody would expect that they would escape slavery and just be like down the road. But because they would do that, they knew the land, they knew how to work it, they knew how to fish and hunt, and they could also secretly go back to the places where they were enslaved and get materials and supplies. And I thought, gosh, that's so fascinating. And it ended up by happenstance meeting a woman who had worked at a plantation in New Orleans. And so she was talking to me about these Maroon communities, and she said, oh, I got a book I'm going to send you. So I have the book here. It's called Slavery's Exiles, the story of American Maroons. So I was reading this book, and there's a chapter specifically on the Maroons who live in New Orleans, or in the New Orleans and Louisiana area. And I won't read you the whole chapter, but as I was reading it, it said that there was a slave owner, a plantation owner, who had a cow that was stolen. So he sent his slaves out into these hinterlands, they called, to find out who did this. And when they got out there, they discovered these communities. And it said they discovered Juan Bautista and Tam and Pedro and Jacques, who ran away from the St. Amant plantation. And I just I couldn't believe that I was reading that, because this book was shared with me by somebody who, you know, doesn't know my family history at all, who maybe didn't even understand the significance of that. And that turned out to be the plantation where my family was enslaved. So these people, Juan Bautista and Tam and Pedro and all these folks, were actual names of people who were generationally related to me. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then it went further than that and said that all these folks, you know, once they escaped, they had to have some kind of industry. So what they would do is go to other plantation owners who they hoped were, you know, sympathetic to former slaves, and they would work their land, and then they would pay them in actual money. but it was dangerous work because sometimes they would go and get paid, go to get their money for being, from their work, and then either, get killed or not get paid, this sort of thing. It was dangerous. But Tam the Brave, they called him that because he was the brave one who would actually go and demand payment. And so Tam came from San Amant Plantation. So in my mind, I'm like, this man must be a relative of mine from many, many generations back from the 1780s. And so I thought, I've got to incorporate him into this story. So Tam the Brave is a real person who's in this story. And John Brown, who was an abolitionist, is in this story. And the characters who I created and made up have experiences that happen to real people. So it is really interesting work. And I'm so happy to do it. And I'm thankful that my ancestors have blessed me with, I really feel like they sent me this information, you know what I mean? That they're like, please tell our story, is what it feels like. And it is a musical, so there's music as well. And we had the opportunity to record our EP that I shared about before through this pandemic in a wonderful place called East West Studios, which is known to have the most Grammy Award-winning albums ever to come out of any studio. But we really went there because so that we could stay safe during the pandemic, because it's a much larger studio than the one we're used to. And we were able to wear a mask and have partitions and all that. So we recorded the EP there, but we've also recorded the music for this musical. And it was so powerful. And my bandmates did such an amazing job of interpreting my vision for this music that I actually had to step out and have a sob. I mean, it is going to be a very dynamic show. Still student appropriate, but it's not going to be skipping around like they were before, with our Jazzy Ash show. This is a different kind of sentiment, but I still think it's important.
Incredibly important. And, we've had the start of a relationship with you and your work, and, a relationship through an agent that we trust, who has so many great children's musicians that she represents. And when you started working on this project, she very early had a conversation with us just saying, hey, I want to plant seeds that Ashli's working on this. And I think she thought it might be something that would be a good fit for us, knowing our aesthetic and our work with students, as well as doing the research that, Des Moines and Iowa had a place on the Underground Railroad. So it feels like
Totally.
we've been kind of getting these informal updates from her about the progress on this musical about a couple of times a year in the last few years. And so we're eager to continue to support and to hear how that project's coming together. So delighted to hear that some of the music's been recorded as we continue to champion and celebrate, in hopes that, it has that life on the road.
It will. And I think it just has to, because our characters, Minnie and Lawrence, the mother and son, they go on a journey through the middle of the country. And so as they go through Iowa, so will this show. You know what I mean? And I just think that will be so fascinating to see how that translates. I'm excited to see develop, and how it has this personal effect on folks who are literally sitting in a place where characters, which really are people like this, might have found their freedom.
Yes. Well, such an important project, and clearly one that's a true labor of love. And I'm sure we could talk about it all night, but I think that kind of brings our time to a close to wrap up. So Ashli, thank you so much for being here with us and being our first featured artist in our creative conversations.
Thank you for having me. Another time for me to blab about all the things I love.
We love it, and we can't wait to welcome you back to Des Moines again, either with your band or other projects that you're working on, because you have such a great approach and respect for the young people that you're performing for and with. So
I can't wait to be back.
So to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please know that we miss you, and we know that you miss live performance, and we can't wait until you're back here at the Civic Center with us as well. But until that time, please keep an eye on DMPA.org as we announce additional creative conversations, as we kind of reveal who's next in our lineup for these chats. And because we've been talking about young audience work tonight, also just want to put a quick plug in that we have announced some Wellmark Family Series virtual programming that is coming your way in December. So please check out our website and for more information on that and tickets. Beyond that, again, just thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to you joining us virtually or in person soon. Good night.